On the evening of October 12, 1996, in the quiet lakeside community of Crystal River, Florida, something happened that would echo for decades. The sun had dipped below the cypress trees, the air still heavy with late summer humidity, when 28-year-old Melissa Carter failed to return home. She was a nursing assistant at Seven Rivers Community Hospital, a mother of two, and known for her punctuality. At exactly 6:42 p.m. she clocked out. At 7:03 p.m., a co-worker saw her silver 1992 Toyota Corolla turn onto North Citrus Avenue. She was expected home by 7:30. She never arrived. By 9:15 p.m., her husband, Daniel Carter, began calling friends. At 10:02 p.m., he dialed the Citrus County Sheriff's Office. Deputies arrived at 10:18 p.m., their headlights sweeping across the quiet driveway, the porch light flickering against gathering mist. Her purse was not inside the house. Her keys were gone. The children were asleep upstairs. By midnight, search units were already canvassing the roadside shoulders between the hospital and her home. Her car would be found the next morning at 6:27 a.m., parked crookedly near a boat ramp off Fort Island Trail, driver's door closed but unlocked. The seat was pushed back farther than Melissa normally kept it. Her coffee thermos sat upright in the cup holder, still half full. Nothing appeared broken, nothing appeared disturbed, and yet everything was wrong. How could a woman vanish in a town where everyone knew her name? Melissa Carter was the kind of person who folded laundry immediately after the dryer stopped. She was 5'4", with chestnut hair usually pulled into a loose ponytail during her hospital shifts. Born and raised in Citrus County, she married Daniel at age 21. Daniel worked as a mechanic at a marine repair shop, known for fixing outboard motors along Florida's Gulf Coast. Their children, Ethan, 6, and Claire, 3, attended local daycare during Melissa's shifts. Her routine rarely varied. She worked 7:00 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. on Saturdays. She always called home at 5:55 p.m. during her final break. On October 12, she did. Daniel would later tell deputies, "She said she'd pick up milk on the way home. That was it. Nothing strange." The morning of October 12 began like any other. At 6:02 a.m., Melissa brewed coffee. The weather report predicted scattered showers, high of 82 degrees. A faint drizzle coated the driveway as Daniel loaded fishing gear into his truck for a planned Sunday outing. The children argued softly over cereal brands. The swing in the backyard moved slightly in the breeze. The toy truck lay on its side in damp grass. At 6:28 a.m., Melissa kissed Claire's forehead and reminded Ethan about spelling homework. At 6:35 a.m., she backed out of the driveway. Daniel watched her taillights disappear beyond the oak trees. The hospital shift passed uneventfully. Co-worker Angela Ramirez later said, "She was tired but laughing. We talked about Halloween costumes." At 6:42 p.m., Melissa clocked out. Surveillance cameras captured her walking toward the parking lot. She wore light blue scrubs and white sneakers. The timestamp read 18:44:16 as she unlocked her Corolla. At 7:03 p.m., Angela noticed Melissa's car merge into light traffic. The rain had stopped. The road glistened. The drive home typically took 22 minutes. At 7:28 p.m., Daniel noticed she hadn't arrived. He assumed she'd stopped at Winn-Dixie. At 8:05 p.m., he grew uneasy. At 8:47 p.m., he drove the route himself, scanning shoulders, gas stations, and parking lots. At 9:12 p.m., he returned home without finding her. When deputies arrived at 10:18 p.m., they observed no forced entry. The children were asleep. Ethan's nightlight cast a soft amber glow. Claire clutched a stuffed rabbit. Deputy Thomas Miller wrote in his report, "Husband appears anxious but cooperative. State's wife never stays out without calling." By dawn, search teams expanded outward from the hospital route. At 6:27 a.m., a fisherman noticed the silver Corolla near the Fort Island boat ramp. The car's position seemed hurried. The odometer reading showed 74,102 miles, only 3 miles more than recorded during her last oil change. The driver's seat was pushed back 2 inches beyond Melissa's normal setting, according to Daniel. Inside the car, investigators found no signs of a struggle. Her purse was missing. Her wedding ring was not found in the vehicle. The coffee thermos remained upright. The radio was tuned to 101.7 FM, a country station she favored. The swing hung still. The toy truck lay on its side. The immediate aftermath was frantic. Bloodhounds were brought in by 10:45. They tracked scent from the driver's seat to the edge of the boat ramp and then stopped abruptly near the waterline. Divers entered the river at 12:30 p.m. Visibility was less than 2 feet. No trace was found. Helicopters scanned mangrove edges. Volunteers formed lines along marshland. Flyers bearing Melissa's smiling photograph were stapled to utility poles by dusk. Those who knew her said she would never leave her children. And yet, by the end of that weekend, Melissa Carter had become a missing person. The search expanded across Citrus County over the following week. Deputies coordinated with the Florida Marine Patrol and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. On October 14, 1996, grid searches covered 5 square miles of wetlands. K-9 units rechecked the hospital parking lot. Dive teams returned to the river twice more. Sheriff's logs recorded over 120 volunteer participants on October 15 alone. Local news stations aired nightly segments. Reporters stood beside the boat ramp, wind tugging at microphones. Daniel appeared on camera October 16, eyes red, voice strained. "We just want her home," he said. Deputies began reconstructing her final movements. Surveillance footage confirmed she left the hospital alone. Gas station attendants along Highway 19 did not recall seeing her stop. Winn-Dixie's register receipts showed no purchase matching her credit card. At 7:03 p.m., traffic light sensors recorded a silver sedan turning east. The timestamp aligned with Angela's account. Investigators calculated distance from hospital to boat ramp, 8.7 miles. Normal travel time, 18 to 22 minutes. If Melissa drove directly there, she would have arrived between 7:21 and 7:25 p.m. But Daniel reported noticing her absence at 7:28 p.m. He claimed he waited only minutes before becoming concerned. Deputies whispered quietly in the hallway outside the Carter residence during their third visit. One noted, "Timeline feels tight." Daniel stated he remained home with the children all evening. Phone records showed 2 outgoing calls at 9:15 and 9:17 p.m. to Melissa's sister and to a coworker. However, no calls were made between 6:00 and 9:00 p.m. When asked why he waited until after 10:00 p.m. to call law enforcement, he replied, "I thought maybe she needed space." For those who have ever doubted someone you love, that phrase lingers. Neighbors described Daniel as composed. Too composed, some whispered. He barely blinked during the search, one volunteer later recalled. Investigators documented small inconsistencies. Daniel initially stated Melissa left with $40 in cash. Later, he revised it to $20. He told one deputy she had seemed distracted that morning. Yet Angela insisted Melissa was cheerful. Forensic technicians processed the Corolla. No fingerprints were recovered beyond Melissa's and Daniel. No fibers inconsistent with the vehicle interior were located. There was no visible sign of struggle. The absence of evidence became its own presence. In a November 3, 1996 case memo, Detective Harold Gaines wrote, "Vehicle location suggests staging. No drag marks. No shoe impressions beyond owner's typical pattern." The odometer reading raised questions. If she drove directly home, the mileage should have reflected roughly 9 miles. The additional 3 miles remained unexplained. Daniel's truck odometer was checked November 5. It showed 112,408 miles. Maintenance records from the marine shop indicated 112,401 miles 2 days prior, 7 miles unaccounted for. Daniel explained, "I drove to look for her." Deputies nodded but wrote quietly in notebooks. Those who knew him said he adored his wife, yet investigators noted his lack of visible panic during interviews. His tone remained steady. When asked about financial stress, he shrugged. Normal stuff. Searches continued into December. The marsh grass turned brittle. Holiday decorations appeared in windows along North Citrus Avenue. The Carter home displayed no lights that year. By January 1997, media attention faded. Tips dwindled. Leads evaporated. Without a body, without physical evidence, the case stalled. On February 14, 1997, Melissa Carter's file was transferred to the cold case cabinet. The swing hung still, the toy truck lay on its side, and silence settled over Crystal River. By the summer of 1997, 8 months after Melissa Carter vanished, the Carter house on North Citrus Avenue looked different. The hedges grew uneven. The mailbox leaned slightly to the left. Daniel stopped mowing the backyard regularly. The swing rusted along its chains. The toy truck, once bright red, faded under relentless Florida sun. On June 3, 1997, Daniel placed the home on the market. Those who knew him said he needed a fresh start. He told neighbors the memories were too heavy. By August, he had moved with Ethan and Claire to a rental property 20 miles north in Dunellen. For the children, life shifted quietly. Ethan began 2nd grade at a new elementary school. Teachers noted he was withdrawn. On September 18, 1997, he drew a picture during art class. A gray car near water, stick figures standing beside it. The teacher circled it gently and asked, "Who are these people?" Ethan replied, "Daddy and Mommy at the river." The drawing was filed in his folder. No one connected it to the open case. Claire, too young to fully understand, asked each night, "When is Mommy coming home?" Daniel answered consistently, "Soon." For those who have ever carried a secret, repetition becomes survival. By 1998, the search efforts had stopped entirely. The Citrus County Sheriff's Office reassigned Detective Gaines. The case binder collected dust. The evidence locker still held Melissa's thermos and a pair of white sneakers retrieved from the Corolla trunk. Daniel began dadding in early 1999. Friends described him as remarkably steady. He rarely spoke of Melissa. When asked about the investigation, he would clear his throat and say, "Clear's throat, they looked at everything. There was nothing." But small details lingered. On October 12, 2000, 4 years to the day after Melissa disappeared, Daniel did not mention the anniversary. Ethan did. At dinner, he asked, "Is today the day Mommy went to the river?" Daniel paused. The fork in his hand hovered midair. "We've talked about this," he said quietly. If you have noticed how silence can grow between two people, You understand what followed. By 2001, Daniel had remarried. His new wife, Rebecca, moved into the Dunellen home. She worked at a local insurance office. Neighbors described the household as orderly, almost rigid. Lights out at 9:30 p.m. sharp. Curtains always drawn by dusk. Ethan entered adolescence carrying unspoken tension. In 2003, at age 13, he began experiencing recurring dreams. In one, he stood at the Fort Island boat ramp. In another, he heard arguing inside a car. He confided in a school counselor on April 17, 2003. "I remember something," he said softly. "I think I wasn't asleep that night." The counselor documented the statement but did not immediately contact authorities. Years had passed. Memories blur. Meanwhile, the marriage between Daniel and Rebecca grew strained. Financial stress resurfaced. Marine repair work fluctuated seasonally. Rebecca reportedly questioned Daniel about the lingering cloud over his past. An acquaintance later told investigators, she once asked him straight out, "Did you tell them everything?" He just stared at her. The psychological weight of suspicion does not disappear simply because a file is closed. On November 2, 2004, Ethan, now 15, visited the old neighborhood with friends. The Carter house had new owners. The swing had been replaced. The yard was immaculate. He stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary. That night, he confronted his father. "I remember being in the truck," Ethan said. "I remember driving." Daniel reportedly responded sharply, "You were dreaming." But Ethan insisted he remembered headlights reflecting on water. He remembered cold air through an open window. He remembered his mother's voice, raised. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, memory becomes both anchor and storm. In December 2005, Rebecca moved out temporarily. Friends described frequent arguments behind closed doors. On January 8, 2006, she filed for separation. 2 weeks later, on January 23, 2006, Ethan walked into the Citrus County Sheriff's Office. He was 16 years old. Deputy intake logs show his arrival at 3:14 p.m. He asked to speak with someone about a memory from 1996. Detective Maria Alvarez, newly assigned to cold cases, listened as Ethan described flashes of that October night. He said he had woken up when his father carried him from the couch into the truck. He remembered his sister still asleep. He remembered driving toward water. He remembered his father telling him, "Go back to sleep." He said, "I think we went to the river. I think Mom was there." Detective Alvarez reopened the Carter file on January 24, 2006. In her notes, she wrote, "Child statement consistent in tone, displays anxiety but no exaggeration, mentions boat ramp unprompted." The case that had slept for nearly a decade began to stir. Investigators re-examined odometer records. They reconstructed the route from the Carter home to Fort Island Trail and back, approximately 14 miles round trip. Daniel's truck had shown 7 unexplained miles in 1996, but maintenance records were handwritten. Precision had been limited. Detective Alvarez requested archived dispatch recordings from October 12, 1996. At 9:48 p.m., Daniel's voice could be heard during the initial call, calm, measured. "My wife hasn't come home yet," he said. Alvarez replayed it repeatedly. She then located Rebecca, now living in Ocala. On February 3, 2006, Rebecca told investigators, "He once said something in his sleep. He said, 'I didn't mean to push her.'" The air shifted. On March 12, 2006, Authorities conducted ground-penetrating radar scans near the Fort Island boat ramp and surrounding wooded areas. The equipment flagged a disturbed patch of earth approximately 200 yards from the waterline. Excavation began March 14 at 8:06 a.m. At 10:32 a.m., a fragment of fabric was uncovered, light blue, consistent with hospital scrubs. The swing hung still, the toy truck lay on its side. And after nearly 10 years, the silence began to break. The excavation continued under a pale March sky, humidity already rising though it was only mid-morning. Deputies formed a perimeter with yellow tape at 8:11 a.m. on March 14, 2006. The air carried the faint scent of salt from the Gulf. Shovels moved carefully. Brushes replaced spades. At 11:47 a.m., a forensic technician uncovered what appeared to be a partial skeletal structure beneath approximately 18 inches of compacted soil. The light blue fabric fragment rested near the collarbone area. A small metallic object, later identified as a wedding band, was located at 12:03 p.m., lodged in the soil inches away. Detective Maria Alvarez stood quietly, hands folded, as the medical examiner's team documented every angle. Position suggests hurried burial, she wrote in her field notebook. No formal grave structure, no container. By 2:26 p.m., remains were carefully removed and transported to the District 5 medical examiner's office in Leesburg. The news traveled fast. Local television vans lined Fort Island Trail by late afternoon. Reporters spoke in hushed tones. Authorities have confirmed human remains were discovered this morning near the site connected to the 1996 disappearance of Melissa Carter. Daniel Carter was at work when he received the call requesting he come in for questioning. He arrived at the sheriff's office at 6:18 p.m. Surveillance footage later reviewed showed him walking steadily, shoulders square, jaw tight. He wore grease-stained jeans and a navy work shirt embroidered with his name. Inside interview room B, Detective Alvarez placed a digital recorder on the table at 6:24 p.m. "Daniel," she began calmly, "we located remains near the boat ramp today." He blinked once. "That doesn't mean anything." At 6:31 p.m. she asked, "Why did your son remember being in your truck that night?" Daniel leaned back, clears throat. "Kids imagine things." She slid a photograph across the table, an image of the excavation site, the blue fabric visible in the soil. For a moment, his composure flickered. The medical examiner's preliminary findings arrived March 16, 2006, at 9:02 a.m. The remains were consistent with a female approximately 5'4". Dental records confirmed identity at 2:14 p.m. Cause of death was listed as undetermined pending further analysis. However, a fracture to the hyoid bone was noted, often associated with compression of the neck. Soil samples indicated burial occurred within 24 hours of disappearance. Detective Alvarez revisited Daniel's 1996 statements. On October 13, 1996, he had told deputies he stayed home all evening. No mention of leaving with his son. No mention of driving near the river. On March 18, 2006, Ethan, now 16, provided a recorded statement. His voice trembled but remained steady in content. He said, "Go back to sleep," Ethan recounted. "I saw Mom outside the car. They were arguing. I heard her say, 'Don't do this.'" Exact words entered the transcript at 4:42 p.m. Deputies whispered quietly outside the interview room. The memory aligned with forensic findings. On March 20, 2006, Investigators obtained a warrant to search Daniel's Dunellen residence. Inside a locked toolbox in the garage, they located an old flannel shirt. Laboratory testing later detected soil composition consistent with samples from the burial site, unique mineral content traced to that specific marshland. In Detective Alvarez's notes, fibers match 1996 manufacturing batch, soil comparison 87% consistent. Daniel returned voluntarily for a second interview on March 22 at 10:03 a.m. Alvarez began directly, "We know you drove that night." Silence filled the room for 11 seconds. He finally said, "It was an accident." The recorder captured every breath. He explained that he confronted Melissa about suspected infidelity, an allegation investigators had never substantiated. He claimed the argument escalated at the boat ramp. "She pushed me," he said. "I grabbed her shoulders. She fell." Alvarez responded evenly. The medical examiner found neck trauma. Daniel looked down at his hands. "I didn't mean to hurt her." At 11:18 a.m. he stated, "I panicked." He admitted to driving home, retrieving a shovel from the garage, and returning to the wooded area near the ramp after midnight. He insisted Ethan remained asleep in the truck. But Ethan's recollection differed. Those who knew him said Daniel rarely raised his voice. Yet in the recorded confession, tension surfaced. "I couldn't lose my kids," he said. "I thought if they didn't find her." The sentence trailed off. At 12:02 p.m., Detective Alvarez ended the interview. An arrest warrant was signed March 23, 2006. At 8:45 a.m., Daniel Carter was taken into custody at his workplace at 9:12 a.m. Deputies approached quietly. He did not resist. Coworkers watched in stunned silence as he was guided to a patrol vehicle. Outside the marine shop, a local reporter asked, "Do you have anything to say?" Daniel paused before entering the cruiser. "I loved my wife," he said. The community fractured overnight. Some neighbors insisted the confession must have been coerced. Others recalled the timeline inconsistencies, the unexplained miles on the odometer, the composure that felt rehearsed. Local headlines read, "1996 cold case solved, husband arrested." At a candlelight vigil held March 25, 2006, Ethan stood beside his sister Claire, now 12. The breeze moved through oak branches as friends placed white flowers at the edge of the river. The swing hung still, the toy truck lay on its side. And for the first time in nearly 10 years, Melissa Carter's name was spoken not as a mystery, but as a truth emerging from the ground. The courtroom in Inverness was colder than expected on July 10, 2007. Air conditioning hummed overhead. Wooden benches creaked as spectators shifted, whispering behind folded programs. Outside, summer storms rolled slowly across Citrus County, thunder muttering in the distance like something unsettled. Daniel Carter sat at the defense table in a gray suit that hung loosely from his shoulders. His hair had thinned. His posture remained upright. He avoided looking toward the gallery where Ethan and Claire sat beside Melissa's sister, Joanne Whitaker. At 9:02 a.m., the clerk called the session to order. The prosecution outlined the timeline carefully, deliberately. October 12, 1996, 6:42 p.m. clockout, 7:03 p.m. last sighting, 6:27 a.m. vehicle discovery, 9:48 p.m. husband's phone call, 7 unexplained miles on a truck odometer, soil composition consistent with burial site, a child's memory that refused to fade. Assistant State Attorney Robert Hale spoke evenly. "This case waited 10 years for a voice," he said, and that voice belonged to a child who grew up. Defense counsel countered that memories distort. 16-year-old recollections of a 6-year-old mind are unreliable, attorney Martin Feldman argued. He emphasized the lack of eyewitnesses to the confrontation and pointed to the original classification of undetermined cause. But the medical examiner, Dr. Lillian Price, testified July 12 at 11:17 a.m. She held up anatomical diagrams for the jury. The hyoid fracture, she explained, is consistent with force applied to the neck. When asked directly, she stated, "It is highly unlikely such an injury resulted from an accidental fall." Jurors watched Daniel carefully as she spoke. He stared straight ahead. Ethan took the stand July 16 at 1:04. His voice carried the weight of years. "I remember headlights on water," he said. "I remember Mom saying, 'Don't do this.'" The courtroom fell silent. Defense counsel asked, "Is it possible you dreamed this?" Ethan swallowed. "No, sir." For those who have ever doubted someone you love, there is a moment when doubt hardens into certainty. Rebecca, Daniel's former wife, testified July 18. He said in his sleep, "I didn't mean to push her," she recalled. "It wasn't once, it was more than once." The prosecution introduced the flannel shirt recovered from Daniel's garage. A forensic geologist explained mineral comparisons at 10:43 a.m. July 19. The soil found in the shirt fibers matched samples from the burial site at an 87% consistency rate. The number lingered in the air. During cross-examination, the defense pressed on the gap in years between disappearance and recovery. "Why wait a decade?" Feldman asked investigators. Detective Alvarez answered calmly, "Because sometimes silence ends." Daniel chose not to testify. Closing arguments began July 23 at 3:15 p.m. Hale paced slowly before the jury box. "He told deputies he stayed home all night," Hale said. "That was not true. He said she might have needed space. She was buried in marshland." He paused. The swing hung still. The toy truck lay on its side, but the truth did not disappear. At 4:02 p.m. the jury retired. Rain battered courthouse windows overnight. Deliberations resumed July 24 at 8:30 a.m. At 2:47 p.m. the jury returned. The foreperson stood. "We find the defendant guilty." Daniel's shoulders dipped for the first time since proceedings began. Claire closed her eyes. Ethan exhaled sharply, a sound almost like release. Sentencing occurred September 5, 2007, at 10:00 a.m. The judge described the concealment as deliberate, the deception sustained for years. Daniel Carter was sentenced to life in state prison. Outside the courthouse, microphones clustered again. Some residents expressed relief. "We always wondered," one neighbor said. Others remained conflicted. "He was quiet, kept to himself," a former co-worker murmured. The community had lived alongside unanswered questions for a decade. Now the answers felt heavy, almost unwelcome. In Crystal River, the boat ramp reopened fully weeks later. Fishermen returned at dawn. The tide moved in and out as it always had. Melissa's sister, Joanne, established a small scholarship fund in her name at Seven Rivers Community Hospital for nursing students. Each October 12, flowers were placed at the river's edge. Detective Alvarez closed the case file on September 10, 2007, at 4:12 p.m. In her final notation, she wrote, "Resolved through persistence of witness memory. Truth delayed, not denied." For Ethan and Claire, healing unfolded slowly. Counseling sessions documented gradual stabilization, yet anniversaries remained difficult. On the 10th anniversary of the arrest, Ethan visited the site alone. He stood quietly, listening to wind in mangroves. If you have noticed how water carries echoes, you understand why some places never fully quiet. Daniel's appeals extended into 2010, but were denied. Court records reflected procedural reviews, each affirmation reinforcing the verdict. The swing had long since been replaced. The toy truck was gone. But memory remained. The case became a reference point in local training seminars for investigators, a reminder that cold does not mean forgotten, that a child's voice can alter the course of justice, that small details, the extra miles on an odometer, a misplaced timeline, a fragment of fabric, can outlast silence. Melissa Carter was 28 years old when she disappeared. She was a mother, a nurse, a daughter. For 10 years, she existed as a question mark in headlines and whispered speculation in grocery store aisles. After July 24, 2007, she became something else, a name attached to resolution. Justice does not erase absence, it acknowledges it. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard. In the months following sentencing, the story did not simply disappear from public conversation. If anything, it settled into a different kind of presence, quieter but heavier. Court transcripts were archived. News vans left town. Yet in Crystal River, people still lowered their voices when the Carter name surfaced. On October 12, 2007, exactly 11 years after Melissa vanished, a small group gathered again at the Fort Island boat ramp at 6:42 p.m. The sky mirrored that evening long ago, humid, amber light stretching thin across the water. Cicadas hummed in the mangroves. The tide moved gently against dock pylons. Ethan stood near the edge of the marsh grass, hands in his pockets. Claire held a single white rose. Joanne Whittaker read a brief statement. She was not a headline, Joanne said. She was a sister, a mother, and a nurse who stayed late when patients needed her. The words carried over still water. For those who have ever waited for truth, you know it does not feel triumphant. It feels steady. It feels earned. Inside the Citrus County Sheriff's Office, Detective Maria Alvarez presented the case during a regional investigative seminar in November 2007. Her tone remained measured, clinical. Early inconsistencies matter, she told a room of deputies. Mileage discrepancies, timeline compression, emotional presentation, none prove guilt alone. Together they form pressure. She displayed photographs, the vehicle angled near the boat ramp, the disturbed soil, the fragment of blue fabric. She emphasized the role of Ethan's statement. A memory resurfaced because silence became heavier than fear, she said. In her notes from that seminar, she later wrote, "Cold cases require patience, not abandonment." Meanwhile, Daniel Carter adjusted to life inside a state correctional facility. Intake records from September 6, 2007, listed him as inmate number 740,198. He maintained minimal contact with the outside world. According to visitation logs, Ethan did not visit. Claire visited once in 2008 but left after 22 minutes. If you have noticed how distance can redefine loyalty, you understand why. Appeals continued into 2009. Defense filings argued improper reliance on memory testimony and soil comparison statistics. On March 3, 2010, the appellate court affirmed the conviction at 11:16. The ruling cited corroborative physical evidence and voluntary confession. The legal chapter closed. but psychological chapters lingered. Ethan enrolled in community college in 2009, studying criminal justice. When asked during an introductory class discussion why he chose the major, he answered simply, "Because sometimes people wait too long." Claire pursued nursing, following the path her mother once walked. She began volunteering at Seven Rivers Community Hospital in 2011. On her first shift, she stood in the hallway where Melissa had once worked. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. For those who return to places marked by absence, courage is often quiet. In 2012, a small bronze plaque was installed near the boat ramp, positioned away from main foot traffic but visible to those who looked closely. It read, "In memory of Melissa Carter, 1968–1996. Beloved mother, daughter, nurse." No mention of the crime, no mention of the trial, just her name. The community itself changed over the years. New housing developments rose along Highway 19. Traffic increased. The old Carter home changed ownership twice more. The swing set was replaced by a screened patio. The oak trees remained. Local reporters occasionally referenced the case when discussing advancements in forensic technology. It became a teaching example, how minor forensic correlations and consistent testimony can revive dormant files. How soil composition analysis, once considered secondary, can reinforce timelines. How recorded interviews, preserved in analog tape archives, may gain significance years later. Detective Alvarez retired in 2018. In her exit interview, she reflected briefly on the Carter case. "It wasn't dramatic," she said. "It was methodical. Small things didn't fit, and they kept not fitting." She paused before adding, "Clear's throat, that's usually where truth hides." For Ethan and Claire, adulthood carried layered understanding. There were birthdays without a mother's call, graduations marked by a reserved empty chair, weddings where photographs included a framed portrait instead of a living presence. Yet the ambiguity that once haunted those milestones no longer hovered. The question mark had become a period. If you have ever lived beneath unanswered suspicion, you know resolution reshapes memory. It does not erase pain, it organizes it. On the 20th anniversary of Melissa's disappearance in 2016, Ethan gave a brief interview to a regional paper. He chose his words carefully. "People think closure is a door shutting," he said. "It's not. It's knowing what happened even if you wish you didn't." The reporter asked if he remembered that night clearly now. He answered, "I remember enough." At Fort Island Trail, tides continued their rhythm. Mangrove roots thickened. Birds nested where search teams once combed grass in grid patterns. The physical landscape healed long before the emotional one. The swing no longer hung there. The toy truck was long gone. But investigators still referenced the odometer reading, 7 unexplained miles. A small number. A detail almost dismissed in 1996. In hindsight, it marked distance traveled not only across roads, but across years of silence. Justice in this case moved slowly. It depended on memory maturing, on science advancing, on persistence resisting fatigue. It required someone willing to say, "I remember," and someone willing to listen. Melissa Carter's story did not remain frozen in 1996. It unfolded across decades, through doubt, through fractured relationships, through quiet determination. And in the end, it stood as a reminder that even when a file grows cold, truth does not. Justice may arrive years late, but memory keeps the door open. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.